Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being covered in this week's edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined by North Coast Journal's news editor, Thad Greenson, and arts and features beat editor, Jennifer Famiko Cahill. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
How you doing?
Pretty good. There's no more orange sky here in Humboldt, a little sunshine and blue sky, so I took the opportunity to smile today as opposed to before. It was so grim. But so that is a segue to what's on the cover this week, Thad, of the North Coast Journal.
Yeah. Well, first on your note, my daughter looked out the window this morning and said, "Daddy, look!" Was just so excited to see like legitimately blue sky. So yeah, the cover of this week's journal is about the fires that are kind of surrounding us here in Humboldt County, really kind of imperiling a couple parts of the county. But one of the things we really wanted to answer is, just how Humboldt County got kind of so quickly inundated. And that I think, especially for those of us who live in kind of the population centers or closer to the coast, it seemed like kind of overnight, all of a sudden, everything was smoky. There was smoke everywhere. And we were hearing about parts of the county that were in real fire danger. And so we kind of wanted to look at like kind of how quickly these things escalated and how we got such heavy smoke cover. I mean, I've lived here 20 years now, and there's certainly been periods of it being smoky or hazy or really smoky in certain parts of the county, but I can't ever remember the entire county being blanketed in such a thick layer. So those are kind of the questions we wanted to answer. And what we found is really there was kind of, obviously we were in the midst of a terrible wildfire season in California. We found that 5 of the largest 20 fires of all time in California have come this year, and the very largest is the one on Humboldt County's southeastern edge, the August Complex. But what we found is that kind of there had been these lightning storms in July and August that had sparked a lot of fires that were kind of growing together. And then we had this really weird wind event, this easterly wind. So this wind coming across the United States from the east and out to the coast. And that's people probably remember we had a kind of a weird heat wave a week or so ago, a week and a half ago, where it was just really unseasonably warm here on the coast, even, kind of in the warm season. And what happened is they had these fires already burning, and then we had this kind of strong east wind, which was really, really hot, dry, and really sparked up these fires and carried their smoke directly over coastal Humboldt County, where it was met with a southerly wind, so wind coming down the coast that was carrying wildfire smoke from Oregon and Washington down, and it just kind of pooled over Humboldt. And then what did kind of flow out of Humboldt to the south was then blown inland, back up, and then back east around. So we're kind of in this like smoke cyclone here. And the meteorologist said that they've really never recorded anything like this either. It was just, account of this kind of unusual wind pattern, and then there just being so much smoke in the air from so many separate fires.
So we have these huge fires to the north, east, and south. We've got wind patterns blowing, making the proximate cause of our orange glowing sky, thick smoke. That's sort of why it happened. But there's also a pretty interesting backstory of kind of how, like what led us to what's the causal agent for why there's just so much fire this year?
Yeah, so we caught up with Jeffrey Kane, who is a wildlands resources and forestry professor at HSU, with a focus on fuel management and fire ecology. And he had some interesting things to say. I mean, he said first and foremost, why we're seeing the severity of fires that we're seeing is climate change. And he was saying that the increased global temperatures have dried out the atmosphere. They dry out fuel loads, and so when you do have a lightning strike or a spark that lights a fire, and there's no evidence really that that's happening any more frequently now than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's just now that when these fires spark, they're much more likely to get out of control. And he said, basically the primary cause of that is that the fuel loads that are in these forests is just so much drier and so much more combustible. And that makes fires burn hotter, spread faster, and just much harder to contain and extinguish. And then he also had some interesting things to say about just the way we could better manage our forests. He was saying that wider, basically doing more things to thin out that fuel load in our forests, so that when when there is a fire, it doesn't burn as hot and as savage. And so, one of the things he said was just doing more thinning activity, going in and taking out dead trees and down trees, and then more controlled burns. Kind of fighting fire with good fire. And then one thing that we didn't really get to go into much in the story, but I thought was really interesting, is he was saying that he kind of sees the future of this is, ecologists and forest managers working with fire officials to determine kind of when a natural fire occurs, when it might be appropriate to just let it burn. When conditions are such, there isn't that easterly wind that's blowing hot and dry. There might be high humidity, or there's just conditions that don't prompt spread, and that it would then be safe just to kind of let a fire naturally burn for a while and burn out, as opposed to kind of the Forest Service and CAL FIRE's mantra, which is really to extinguish every fire before they get out of control. But he seemed to feel like with a little bit more expert input, they might be able to kind of change the paradigm a little bit there.
So I actually heard recently, I think it was on the radio local news show, where they interviewed someone who said that there were traditional methods in the past. Some of the tribal communities did burns, but then that was outlawed for close to 100 years. And so that sort of also led to some of the buildup of fuel in some of the areas nearby.
Yeah, and I think if you want to go and learn more about those native practices and controlled burns, I strongly recommend going to the North Coast Journal website and searching for Malcolm Terrence, which honestly, if you find his bread recipe, also read that. Or his review of an elementary school musical adaptation of, what was it? Was it Moana? It was, I don't know. It was amazing.
But it was fabulous.
It was unlicensed and fantastic. But he's written quite a bit about firefighting, about controlled burns, and about native practices of controlled burn, and what those practices have to teach us about management.
Yeah, and actually out in the Klamath Trinity region, there is kind of a movement to restart those controlled burns that has really caught on and is helping inform kind of statewide and even national practices now. And what they did was they brought together just a really diverse group of stakeholders, from fire agencies to ranchers to native tribes in the region, to kind of collaborate on how to come up with forest management plans. And so what they had started doing really widely was getting CAL FIRE to issue permits for them to do controlled burns on private property. And they had to go to kind of extraordinary lengths to try to convince CAL FIRE that they knew what they were talking about, and that they weren't going to let these fires get out of control into real wildland fires. And incrementally, over probably going on a decade now, they've been able to do that kind of on bigger and bigger scales, to the point that they actually did one last year, I believe, during a red flag warning. And it was kind of a huge deal within fire circles, because it was the first time that CAL FIRE had made an exemption on these blanket burn bans, and it was really because the agency had so much faith in it's called the Klamath T-Rex group in doing these and doing them well.
So thank you for some backstory. We'll definitely check that out. So we have this little bit of reprieve, I would say, but the fires are still burning. I think in the article you mentioned that the big three around us, or the big two around us, or maybe three, are less than 30% contained. So what we have evacuation order either pending or in process down south. What's the latest on the encroachment in southeastern Humboldt?
Yeah, so a portion of southeastern Humboldt remains under evacuation order, a wider swath kind of under a warning. And what fire crews there are trying to do is create a really strong fire line, basically along the county edge up to the Mad River, from Ketton Palm up to the Mad River. And they were making good progress on that, and optimistic that they'll be able to get that in. And then, once they do, that the communities will be able to return to their homes. I think there's about 600 people currently under an evacuation order down there. So that's the hope. The bad news about our blue sky here is it means that the winds have picked up some, which is bad for firefighting efforts in other parts of the county. So I know the Red Salmon Complex, which is the one bordering Hoopa and Willow Creek out to our east, is picked up fire activity today, and there's some concern there. That's the one that officials have said, they're going to do their best to contain it and protect communities, but it's likely to burn until extinguished by prolonged rain, which the hydrologist we chatted with at the National Weather Service was kind of struck an optimistic tone, saying, we don't see that in the forecast yet. But then when asked further about it, she said the models really don't show that coming for a month or so, which is kind of a scary prospect.
And that fire's 95,000 acres, right? That's the big one?
No, the big one is almost 800,000 acres. That's the one that borders southeastern Humboldt, the August Complex, which is actually the largest wildfire in California history. But yes, the Red Salmon Complex is about 100,000 acres. It's large, mostly in national forest lands.
The August is the one that I think was compared to the size of Rhode Island, right?
Oh,
it is larger than the size of Rhode Island, yes, which is kind of staggering to wrap your head around. And that one actually started as 36 different fires that have now all grown together. So I think viewers may recall that being referred to as the Hopkins Fire or the Elkhorn Fire or a host of other names. It's because they have all merged together, and now it's the August Complex, north, south, and west.
Wow, to be continued. Thanks, Dad.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we are going to be hearing about and writing about and living with the impacts of these fires for some weeks.
Yeah, I guess part of the trouble is we have to worry about the air quality too. And just a plug for a resource that I found is IQ Air Map. If you Google IQ Air Map, it's got a really cool graphic where you can zoom in on your community. If you zoom out to the regional level, it shows you the wind direction. So a few friends out in the Willow Creek area have told me how useful it was for them to decide when they need to leave and when they can go back to their homes. And I thought that's a really good resource to share. So thanks again.
Nice. Yeah, thank you for mentioning
that. What's going on with you, Jennifer, and the Arts and Features beat this week?
Well, so last week we talked about restaurants and how they're struggling, and the smoke did not help this weekend. That was not helpful. A lot of people weren't able to use the outdoor dining that they just built, and it was a tough time. But last week I talked briefly about places like the Griffin that really relied on gigs, having musicians come, having DJs, having live events where people are dancing and staying, lingering, and buying drink after drink. It's not only the Griffin. There are a lot of places that have really suffered, some of them around the HSU area, on the plaza, in Old Town Eureka. And one of the confusing things about losing that business is that live events haven't really stopped for everyone. Some venues, whether out of confusion or just deciding to flout the regulations, have continued having live events of some kind or another. But it's really important that everybody remember that this is not okay yet. We are not yet in a stage of shelter in place where we can have live outdoor or indoor events. It doesn't matter if there's social distancing inside or outside your restaurant. It doesn't matter if everybody is wearing masks. Live performances are still verboten. So this is something that hasn't been clear with the shift maybe to the state rules, the state guidelines that put us in the orange zone right now. But as Thad can probably explain much better and with better math than I can.
Yeah, we have the state tiering lags a couple weeks behind current caseload numbers and stuff. So we've actually been on pace to move up to the red tier for a week and a half, 2 weeks now.
Which is scary, of course, because of, we don't want those numbers. We don't want to be in a situation where we're going backwards. But it's particularly scary for restaurants, bars, other venues, because that means they would be the first thing to shut down. Indoor dining would definitely go. Whether or not outdoor dining would go, I'm unsure. That's something that I'd have to clarify. And this is already a really tough time for everybody to get by. People are just scraping by now. And I talked to a couple of people who run establishments. One of them was at the Siren Song, where JD Pegg has just taken over the restaurant and bar and has done actually a really beautiful job of making an outdoor seating area that's in front of the Romano Gabriel sculpture garden. And it's lit, and there's outdoor tables, and there's heat lamps, and you want to go. And, you know, he's doing different things with food, etc. But in order to keep him in the black, he's also been having live events, and those are not allowed. And when we first spoke, it seemed like maybe there was some confusion about whether or not those events were allowed under current guidelines, and with all the measures that he's come up with to work on ventilation and spacing and all that stuff. But events like karaoke and live bands are still not allowed. However, after our conversation, he declined to say whether or not he would cancel them. And at some point, he got a phone call from OES and still was not ready to 100% say he's not doing it. And this should speak, I think, to an issue that that the pandemic has left us with, which is we have put people in a position where they are making these kinds of choices, where they are having to decide between paying their employees, making their livelihood, and following legal guidelines. So we've basically arranged a system and not rolled back the virus enough to where people are going to be breaking the rules and potentially, in the long run, having more positive cases. The kinds of issues with live performances are different from just indoor dining. When we're indoor dining, we're eating, we're talking, etc. With a live performance, you are projecting. And that is where we see aerosols in the air that can linger up to, I think, Thad, was it 30 minutes in some studies? So the aerosols, the tinier particles than the droplets, which, you know, droplets heavier, land on the ground, land on surfaces. I'm still a paranoid freak wiping down my groceries, but the aerosols that linger in the air increase with things like singing, people singing along. You'd have people drinking and therefore having their masks off. You'd have, you know, the attracting of more people to a place. And we don't have confirmation that things like ventilation or, you know, more airflow in, say, an outdoor setting make that much of a difference in terms of a singing, dancing, you know, heavy breathing kind of event. So,
well, just to jump in real briefly, I mean, I think the other issue that health officials have with these types of performances is that they really encourage people to linger. And so, you know, two of the big factors are proximity and duration. So it's one thing to, you know, to pass by somebody in the supermarket aisleway. It's another to sit next to somebody for 2 hours or something like that. And by their nature, live performances, the idea of them is to get people to stay and to talk and to, you know, stay in a space.
Right. And if you do Freebird, I'm singing along and I'm projecting at my table, much to everyone's dismay. But, you know, it makes me think about McDonald's. McDonald's designed their seating, you know, those awful plastic chairs that are just about 2 inches more narrow than any normal person's butt. Like those chairs that are kind of rigid and the tables that are a little bit further away than you need them to be. That's all designed so that you don't stay. They want you moving. They want to have the next people come in and take that table. If you have a beautiful setup that's super comfy, you know, I'm sorry, coffee shops. It's your fault I was there all day. But anyway, so I also spoke to another establishment owner, Joanna Nagin from Blondie's, and she's kind of going in a way the opposite route. She has been going further than the regulations have been telling her to go. She could expand her outdoor seating, but she's like, you know what? We serve alcohol. The more drinks people have, the more relaxed they get, the looser they get about distancing. I don't know if I can have more people here. She even had an event that was like sort of an outdoor lecture kind of talk thing that she had looked into, like, okay, is this something that we could do in in an acceptable way according to the rules, this Science on Tap event that I don't know if you've gone to. But then she looked at it and she decided, you know what, no matter what the rules are, it used to get really busy. I can't draw more people here. And so she's kind of doing this balancing act of trying to survive on takeout, a little bit of outdoor patio dining, and holding back from events and other things, because her question was, how do I keep people safe? And so it's really something that is a more complex issue than following the rules or not. And it's been hard to watch these businesses struggle. But if we aren't reporting on it, if we aren't, sharing and letting the public know what goes into these decisions, I feel like, we don't get across the truth of the situation. And honestly, like I said last week, these are all choices that we have to make, whether we attend things or not, whether we gather with other people or not, that are going to, in the long run, impact all of us, including the restaurants and bars that we love so much.
So the Humboldt reopening certification team you referenced in your article, they did send around a message letting people know, and I think that there was some clarification communication, and this is just an ongoing process.
Yeah, that message originally went out in August, and as you know, the rules shifted to the state rules shortly after that. But those rules are unchanged about live performance. Gotcha. But I can't just tell you to stay home for nothing. I do want to tell you that this week we also have a really great recipe from Simona Carini. Your girl Simona is back with a recipe for peppers, which are everywhere at the farmer's market. They are bursting everywhere. There are a million kinds of peppers, which she kind of walks you through. And also, I think she would encourage you to, if you see a pepper you don't recognize and you don't know how to cook, buy it anyway. Buy it, cut it, taste it, and try it. But she has this great recipe for sauteed peppers and onions with a little bit of curry to make it spicy and make it pop a little bit. And then she covers it with, she recommends a Cypress Grove, is it Midnight Moon? The Midnight Moon cheese to melt over it. And I also think that this is a very special time for us all doing all this takeout where, when you're at a restaurant, you're like, I love this burger, but I wish it had a different bun. You can legit make it happen at home. So you don't have to be like me and bring your own baguette to a restaurant like a freak. So you can make, for example, Simona's peppers and then get your favorite burger and ask yourself, do these peppers also go on this burger? Sure, you can do a million things with them, and you can make a ton of it ahead and then have it so that you are not sad and having the same sad breakfast every day. You can add it to a million different things. She means it as a side, but also as kind of a topping. So strong recommend, make the peppers, buy the peppers, make the peppers.
And you could freeze them too, right?
I think peppers and onions would freeze after they're cooked. Okay. I wouldn't let them go too long. But if you're going to puree them after, freeze away.
Yeah. And then you could use them in all sorts of things like hummus and things like that.
Go nuts.
Yeah. Like roasted red peppers, I think, are one of the all-time little treats to make certain recipes pop. You can add them to all sorts of things, and most people are like, most people look at it like, is that really necessary? It's not necessary, but it helps.
Yes,
Yeah.
And every little thing helps right now. Yes.
Exactly. And one other thing that you mentioned, which I think is really cool, is in our house when we experiment with things, we'll say, is this going to go on our restaurant menu or is it not going to go on the restaurant menu? We don't actually have a restaurant. We probably never will have a restaurant.
I think everybody has an imaginary restaurant. Like if I had a restaurant, I would serve. That's a survey we need to run.
Yeah, exactly. And then you say to yourself, oh, this is a keeper. So I think the pepper recipe that I saw is a keeper. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
All right.
Well, that's about going to do it for us this week. North Coast Journal is on newsstands now. Pick one up. Go North Coast Journal online. Stay informed. Stay safe. Thad and Jennifer, thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you. See you next week.
Bye, guys.